You've been in the chair for a few months now, and I'm sure you've come to some insights and interesting conclusions about agriculture. Can you just share a few observations?
Yeah, well, firstly, just to say how incredible it is to see the incredible knowledge and technical know-how, big data, and insight there is in the industry and sector players. And I think that's one of the beauties about the agricultural sector, is that the expertise doesn't sit in the department; it sits out in your organizations, your grain essays, your agri essays, size, all of these organizations, as well as the industry bodies and representative organizations, have got huge insights and they want to share it. And they have been more than willing to come on board and share information and share data. The recent trip to China was very well briefed by the red meat industry players, by the Citrus Growers Association. And to have a department where you have access to this huge knowledge and expertise is absolutely amazing to see. The second thing that has really struck me is just the quality of South Africans' farmers and farm workers. Having been to the G20 and now been in China and being exposed to other farm economies around the world, our farmers, without a doubt, and our farm workers are the best in the world. They're competing against environments that are heavily government subsidized. Our teams work without subsidy, and yet we're still competitive and on the cutting edge of South African of international agricultural production and marketing. And I think that's a huge opportunity. And thirdly, the thing that struck me is the huge potential that exists in the sector for jobs and economic growth for South Africa as a whole. South Africa has a large unemployment rate, 42% unemployment on the expanded measure, and the shape of that employment is largely unskilled or less skilled. Now, there's only three ways you can absorb that type of labor very quickly in terms of creating jobs, and one is industrial processing, the second is tourism, but the third is agriculture and agro-processing. So I see a huge opportunity for us to use the sector to get on top, and growth in the sector to get on top of the unemployment crisis in South Africa, to lift people out of unemployment into jobs and to help reduce poverty. And those are some of the insights in the sector that have really struck me quite vividly during the course of the last 2 months.
Just a piece of trivia for you. We did some research a few years ago, and about 85% of all commercial farmers have degrees or some form of formal education. So they're all animal scientists or lawyers or whatever. So it's knowledge right down to the ground. Just with regards to specific industries, we know that avos are doing really well at the moment, and citrus, there's all kinds of deals going on, and it's all good for us. What about the red meat industry? What's on your radar?
So what we need to do with the red meat industry is really focus on a national track and trace system. What's holding us back from the red meat industry is biosecurity issues. If I look at our existing trade agreements that we have, for instance, with the European Union, South Africa is the only country on the continent of Africa that has a bilateral trade agreement with the European Union. And yet they're getting their beef from Namibia and Botswana, largely because of biosecurity concerns around foot and mouth. Access to new markets around the world is being hampered by biosecurity issues. So we need to do, as a department, and I've clearly said it as one of my priorities, is to focus on biosecurity. And I want to work very closely with the red meat industry bodies to put in place a track and trace system for animals and livestock in the country, so that we can meet the demands of biosecurity issues, but also the requirement now from more of our international clients and markets for farm-to-fork traceability on animals. And I think that we can do that, it will add to the value proposition as well, to what we can export. I think it will open up more markets and expand on current ones. But thirdly, I think having a proper track and trace system in the country for livestock will also start to deal with the livestock theft problem that we have in South Africa. Nobody should be moving livestock anywhere in South Africa without a requisite paperwork and permit. And that permit and paperwork should become an absolute norm if a person is stopped with a bakkie load or a truckload or a lorry load of animals, they should be asked to produce paperwork and to be able to count where those animals are coming from, where they're going to, who they are owned by, and the proper transport and movement permit for them. I think we also need to focus on reinstating the red zone in Limpopo and parts of KwaZulu-Natal. I think it protected us from foot and mouth for over 20 years. And I think the breakdown of the enforcement there and the laxness that's set in there has seen the outbreaks now in the northwest, in KwaZulu-Natal, Free State, and now in the Eastern Cape. And so what part of the priorities would be to re-establishing that red zone and making sure those protocols are in place so we can contain foot and mouth. But it goes beyond that as well. It's also making sure we've got the right amount of vaccines. They're required to be on top of animal diseases. And this is why I want us to put biological products as a focus area for me, about getting it back to being a world-class institution. I mean, it is world-renowned. It has led some big international fights against animal disease, anthrax being one of them. And it is just a shadow of its former self. We need to get it back on its feet again, and that's going to require strong leadership and intervention and management there to get it back on its feet again, so that once again it's going to be on the cutting edge of animal vaccines and animal health in South Africa.
Just back on the subject of traceability, have you been in discussions about LITS SA, the system, and where they stand?
Yeah, LITS has had a very mixed reaction, and I don't think LITS is the ultimate solution. And in discussion with the red meat industry and their sector representatives, I think the consensus now is that what we need is a model that can absorb LITS and data points from LITS and other animal management, but into a central database with central tagging of animals and a centralized barcoding system so that we can do it. I think that by giving farmers the choice about which system they want to use is the right one, but it must feed into an overarching system where there is consistency and applicability and which has integrity in the system, so that people know that when that barcode is aligned to that animal, it can be a trusted relationship.
Yeah, and of course for a farmer it's about affordability.
Yeah, and choice. And I think that there is an opportunity within the traceability system to have different levels. Are you going to insist that each communal farmer owns is using RFID tags and that satellite trackability tags on their animals? It's unrealistic. But can we have a system that incorporates different levels and recognizes different levels of farmers and has requirements according to those and allows all of those to feed into the overarching system? I think is the way to go forward. And the red meat sector body has really done extensive work on this. And I've been in conversations with Deerwald and others around how do we make the system now become a reality, because we've been talking about it for a long time. I think LITS had good intentions, but I don't think LITS has brought us everything that we need in terms of requirements for a real proper traceability track and trace system, and one that can give assurance to international markets that this is a serious system that in which the integrity from farm to fork is maintained.
Is there sort of a timeline for that?
Well, I would obviously like to get it done as quickly as possible, but the one thing I have realized being in government is that it does move rather slowly, and it is very frustrating. In opposition, you can just say things. In government now, it takes a bit of time to get departmental officials around. But I do think that what I have seen, and also by, I think, force of personality and repetition, being able to drive this biosecurity initiative in the department is going to do two things. First of all, to make sure the department is oriented towards it, but then also increasing the budget towards biosecurity. It's been a very low allocation in the last few budgets. I want to massively increase the budget in the coming medium-term development, medium-term budget policy statement to see how we can put more there, but certainly in the new budget that comes in February, to be able to have a much bigger chunk of money going towards biosecurity. And the great thing about it is that the department doesn't have to stand on its own on this. there's huge appetite in the private sector and the industry players to have a system of track and trace and a strong biosecurity culture, because ultimately it's the farmers and the producers and the exporters and the abattoirs that will benefit from that, because they'll be able to realize higher prices for South African animal products abroad if there is a system with integrity in place.
Just on biosecurity, there's been a lot of rumors flying around, but actually some of them have been confirmed about Namibian imports crossing the border and nothing being checked or veterinarian checked, or and I know there's been a tussle about whether it's a border control issue, whether it's a biosecurity issue. Who needs to take responsibility?
Well, any imports on animal products would have to come through the Department of Agriculture. Obviously, Namibia is a pretty low risk area in terms of foot and mouth and that sort of disease that can come through there. But obviously, you don't want unregistered or unregulated animal products crossing borders, because that's really how you can open up a real can of worms. So I've been asked to look into it. I am doing so. But in the new biosecurity hub and council that's been created, I have requested Minister Leon Schreiber from Home Affairs to provide an official from the Border Management Authority to sit on the Biosecurity Council, because they are going to be responsible at the border level for ensuring compliance with biosecurity. And so I think it has to be a whole of government approach. I also think that the SAPS need to be conscientized towards the importance of biosecurity. Yes, stopping a truckload of cattle or sheep or pigs on a road to check the paperwork may not feel like you're stopping a major bank robbery or economic heist. But if one looks at the damage economically done by outbreaks of foot and mouth, I mean, we're sitting close to 100 million rand now worth of economic damage in Humansdorp, Eastern Cape area as a result of the outbreak. These are big economic issues. And so I think the police also need to be sitting on the Biosecurity Council and to be conscientized to how important their role is going to be in terms of managing DMA areas, but also to be having a slightly more proactive approach to stopping and searching and livestock transporters around the country to make sure that the requisite paperwork is in place and that these are not animals coming from Limpopo being allowed to just simply drive into the Northwest or the Eastern Cape or KwaZulu-Natal.
Just on a completely different note, the land bank, everything is now clean, the books are clean, and we are glad. But what now? Is there a plan? Are they going to become an agricultural bank again like they should be?
Yes, certainly. And I've had a meeting and engagement with the Minister of Finance already on Wednesday this week around him saying he just wants oversight of the bank, but the projects must be agriculturally driven. And I think the land bank now has an opportunity to really take its place, rightful place, as a catalytic driver of growth in the agricultural sector. Two of the biggest obstacles to particularly new farmers getting access to farming and starting successful farming, one of them is access to finance. Farming is very capital intensive. The startup costs are incredibly high, both from land purchase to equipment purchase to input purchase requires money. And I think the land bank can be playing a big role there. But I also see the land bank as a useful landing point for international funding as well. I've already been in touch with a number of international organizations who are very keen to put money into biosecurity projects, put money into small farmer support, put money into land restitution, but there's a reluctance to just simply hand it over to government departments. Having a credible institution like the Land Bank now provides a good landing point for that funding to come in. And so I've got the Food and the FAO from the United Nations have already committed money to biosecurity. And the Land Bank gives us an opportunity. I also think the Land Bank can play a catalytic role in terms of a new project which we're exploring, which is how do we expand access to agricultural insurance in the country for farmers. The government spends a lot of money every year on having to mitigate against disasters, fires, floods, frosts, natural events, etc. And I think that there needs to be a cost-benefit analysis done on whether it might be better to pay some money up front in terms of a partnership scheme with private insurance companies, the land bank, and government to provide access to cheaper insurance, crop insurance, animal insurance for farmers, so that if there is a catastrophic event, that they would have immediate access to an insurance claim. The problem with disaster declaration is it sometimes takes upwards of a year to declare a disaster, and then you really, for many farmers or particularly small scale producers, they're out of business. Then they
Damage
can't
is
recover.
done.
The damage is done. Whereas if you had an insurance scheme that was state backed, I think that you would be able to have the insurance companies making sure that people had immediate access to the things that they need to go forward. And so I think the land bank has a huge potential to really become a game changer again in the agricultural sector. Talking to some of the farmers, the existing farmers here in places like Nampo, they talk about the big role that the Agricultural Credit Bureau played in helping them get started and turning them from small producers and smaller farmers into large-scale producers. And I think there's a huge opportunity there for the land bank again to be at the center of the catalytic projects that are required to transform the sector going forward.
Going holistic, the agricultural master plan. We know it's got a lot of goals and we have to do something about it. What's next there? Which goal is coming? What is coming first?
Yeah. So I think that the first thing in terms of the agriculture and agro-processing master plan is the fact that we have a plan. It may not be a perfect plan. It may have some flaws, and it may not be to everybody's liking, but it is a plan. And as George Patton, the US general from World War II, famously said, that a good plan violently executed today is better than a perfect plan executed next week. I think what the sector is needing is to start seeing some of the action required in terms of the plan. And having gone through the plan, I think there are some sections where the department has not met its obligations in terms of the plan, where perhaps we could have been strengthening value chains and the round tables, where government has made commitments on things that it has not necessarily met. So I think we need to go through the plan very, very carefully and make sure that it is what has been working is amplified, what hasn't been working is adjusted and rectified, but that we continue towards the goals of the plan, which I think are sound. I think that the plan is a good plan, and I think that we should be now focusing on the implementation of it rather than starting another 2-year round of negotiations. Let's get out there and start doing some of the things that we know are required. Building value chains, creating greater export markets, focusing on greater participation in value chains for smaller producers. How do we ensure viability, sustainability, and profitability in the farming sector? How do we turn smaller and medium farmers into big and commercial farmers? How do we protect agricultural land? How do we make sure that there are a greater demand for the products? And I think all of those goals of the AAMP are there. I think what they're crying out for is now high-speed implementation of that.
Do something.
Yeah, just do something, yeah.
I heard you did speak to BFAP
Yes.
about one or two things there.
Yeah. Yeah.
What will their role be?
So, I mean, I think that in terms of the advisory capacity that they have is very, very important. Both them, the NAMC, others provide valuable data sets which allow us to be able to plan for the future and the way forward. And so I see them playing an invaluable advisory role to the ministry in terms of the information that we require to make evidence-based decisions. And I've made it very clear to the department that when I have to make a decision and I ask why, I don't want to be told because that's how it's been done for 30 years, because that's not an answer for me. I think the department has to be science-led, evidence-based, and I think having access to that information that BFAP and others are able to provide means that we can make far more strategic decisions at the ministerial and ministry level to ensure that we don't have unintended consequences when you sit in an office and decide on something. So I'll give you a good example. The department, in my first week I was there, published a regulation that rabies injections would now only be provided and administered by veterinary surgeons. Now, it may sound like a good idea, but the reality is we've got large numbers of NGOs and CBOs that go out and do large-scale vaccinations in less formal areas, township areas, of animals there. The reality is the department is never going to get out there, and that registered vets are never going to get out there. And now you know, by making a regulation like that, you've had the unintended consequence of actually, you know, almost causing a new rise in rabies, because those CBOs and NGOs can't get out there and do it. And so I've said to the department, you need to rethink that, and they're reversing it. But we need to make evidence-based, science-led decisions and take into account both intended and unintended consequences. And having data at your fingertips, having that information, having that research makes it much easier for you to do so.